In the winter of 1258, the city of Baghdad, once the intellectual heart of the known world, stood on the edge of collapse. For centuries, it had been a center of scholarship, trade, and political power, a place where ideas from across continents were gathered, studied, and preserved. But in a matter of weeks, this vast legacy would be shattered. Armies advanced from the east, carrying with them a force that had already dismantled kingdoms and redrawn the map of Asia. When they reached the walls of Baghdad, the consequences would extend far beyond the fall of a single city. What followed marked the end of an era. By the mid-13th century, the Abbasid Caliphate had already declined from its earlier strength. Though Baghdad remained symbolically significant as the seat of the caliph, real political authority had fragmented over time. Regional powers had emerged, and the caliph's influence was often limited. Still, the city retained immense cultural and intellectual importance. Institutions like the Beit al-Hikmah, or House of Wisdom, had fostered centuries of scholarship, preserving and expanding upon works from Greek, Persian, and Indian traditions. Scholars in Baghdad contributed to mathematics, astronomy, medicine, and philosophy, shaping knowledge that would later influence other parts of the world. At the same time, a new power was rising across the Eurasian steppe. The Mongol Empire, founded earlier in the century, had expanded rapidly under a succession of leaders. By the 1250s, the empire stretched from East Asia into parts of Eastern Europe and the Middle East. Hulagu Khan, a grandson of Genghis Khan, was tasked with extending Mongol control further west. His campaigns were systematic and often met with limited resistance, as many cities chose submission over confrontation. As Hulagu advanced toward the Islamic world, he targeted centers of political and military significance. Baghdad, though no longer a dominant military power, still held symbolic weight. Its caliph, al-Mustasim, faced a critical decision. Historical records suggest that he underestimated the scale and determination of the approaching Mongol forces. Diplomatic exchanges took place, but no effective alliance or defense strategy emerged. The city was left vulnerable. In early 1258, the Mongol army reached Baghdad. Their forces were vast and well organized, incorporating not only Mongol troops but also engineers and specialists from across their empire. Siege techniques had become increasingly sophisticated, and the defenses of Baghdad, though formidable in earlier centuries, were not prepared for this level of assault. The siege began with encirclement. Mongol forces cut off supply routes and isolated the city. Over the following days, they deployed siege engines to breach the walls. Historical accounts describe the use of catapults and other mechanical devices capable of launching projectiles over great distances. The defenders attempted resistance, but coordination was limited, and morale declined as the scale of the assault became clear. Within a short period, the outer defenses were compromised. Once the Mongol forces entered the city, control quickly collapsed. What followed has been recorded in various historical sources, though details differ in scale and description. It is widely agreed that the city experienced extensive destruction. Administrative centers, residential districts, and institutions of learning were all affected. One of the most frequently cited aspects of the event is the destruction of libraries and scholarly collections. Baghdad had accumulated vast repositories of manuscripts over centuries. These included works on science, philosophy, literature, and theology. During the sack, many of these materials were lost. Some accounts suggest that books were discarded into the Tigris River, though the exact extent of this cannot be precisely verified. What is clear is that a significant portion of accumulated knowledge was destroyed or dispersed. The fall of Baghdad also marked the end of the Abbasid Caliphate as a central political institution. Caliph al-Mustasim was captured, and his death effectively ended the dynasty's rule in the city. While Abbasid lineage would later continue in a limited form elsewhere, the political and symbolic center that Baghdad represented was gone. The immediate consequences extended beyond physical destruction. The city's population suffered greatly, though historical estimates vary widely. Economic activity halted, trade networks were disrupted, and administrative systems collapsed. Baghdad, once a hub connecting different regions, lost its central role almost overnight. The broader impact of the sack of Baghdad can be understood in several dimensions. Politically, it accelerated the fragmentation of power in the region. Without a strong central authority, various local rulers and external forces competed for control. The Mongols themselves established dominance in parts of the Middle East, forming what became known as the Ilkhanate. Culturally and intellectually, the loss was profound. While knowledge was not entirely erased, many works had already spread to other regions. The destruction of Baghdad's institutions disrupted a major center of learning. Scholars were displaced, and the networks that had supported intellectual exchange were weakened. Over time, other cities would emerge as centers of scholarship, but the unique role Baghdad had played was not immediately replaced. Economically, the disruption of trade routes had ripple effects. Baghdad had been a key node in networks connecting East and West. Its decline altered the flow of goods and resources, contributing to shifts in regional economies. Some areas adapted and developed new centers of commerce, while others experienced prolonged instability. It is also important to consider the event within the broader context of Mongol expansion. The sack of Baghdad was not an isolated incident but part of a larger pattern of conquest. The Mongol approach combined military efficiency with strategic calculation. In some cases, cities that surrendered were spared large-scale destruction, while those that resisted faced harsher outcomes. Baghdad's experience reflected both its symbolic importance and the consequences of failed negotiation. Despite the scale of the destruction, the region did not remain in permanent decline. Over subsequent decades, the Ilkhanate rulers adopted aspects of local culture and governance. Some Mongol leaders converted to Islam, and efforts were made to rebuild parts of the region. Trade gradually resumed, and new political structures emerged. However, the transformation was significant, and the continuity of earlier institutions was broken. The memory of the sack of Baghdad has persisted in historical narratives as a turning point. It is often cited as the end of the classical Islamic Golden Age, though such characterizations can oversimplify complex historical processes. Intellectual activity continued in other regions, and cultural developments persisted. Nevertheless, the event marked a clear disruption in one of the most important centers of medieval scholarship. Modern historians approach the sack of Baghdad with careful attention to sources and context. Contemporary accounts vary in detail and perspective, influenced by the author's backgrounds and intentions. Some descriptions emphasize the scale of destruction, while others focus on political and military aspects. By comparing these sources, scholars attempt to reconstruct a balanced understanding of the event. What remains consistent across these accounts is the recognition of Baghdad's significance before 1258 and the magnitude of change that followed. The city's fall was not merely a local but part of a broader transformation affecting multiple regions. It illustrates how shifts in power can reshape cultural and intellectual landscapes, sometimes abruptly. The story of Baghdad before and after 1258 also highlights the resilience of knowledge. While institutions were destroyed and collections lost, ideas continued to circulate. Manuscripts that had been copied and distributed survived in other locations. Scholars carried their learning to new centers, contributing to the continuity of intellectual traditions. In this sense, the legacy of Baghdad did not disappear entirely, even as the city itself declined. At the same time, the event serves as a reminder of the vulnerability of cultural heritage. Libraries, archives, and institutions depend on stable conditions to function and preserve knowledge. When those conditions collapse, the loss can be difficult to recover. The sack of Baghdad demonstrates how quickly centuries of accumulation can be disrupted. In the centuries that followed, Baghdad would be rebuilt and would continue to exist as an important city, though never again with the same level of influence it had achieved during its peak. Other cities, such as Cairo and later Istanbul, would take on greater prominence in the Islamic world. The center of gravity had shifted. Looking back, the events of 1258 represent both an and a transition. They marked the of a major political and intellectual center while also contributing to the reshaping of regional dynamics. The consequences were felt across generations, influencing patterns of governance, scholarship, and cultural exchange. The image of Baghdad as a place where knowledge once flourished and where much of it was lost continues to resonate. It reflects not only a historical but also broader questions about preservation, continuity, and change. The destruction of institutions did not erase the achievements of the past, but it altered the through which those achievements would be remembered and built upon. In this way, the Sack of Baghdad stands as a defining moment in medieval history. It illustrates the intersection of and culture, showing how the actions of a single campaign can reverberate across continents and centuries. The city that had once gathered the knowledge of the world faced a transformation that reshaped its identity and legacy, leaving behind a history that continues to be studied, debated, and remembered.